We're reviewing Marvel's What If Season 1, or just What If. So, going back around the time that Avengers Endgame came out, Kevin Feige and everyone in Marvel Studios were announcing their next 10-year plan for their new saga. It's more like before they officially announced what the new saga would be called. Still, at this time, they were announcing all of Phase 4, and when they were halfway done with Phase 4, they would go on to Phase 5 and 6. But going back to Phase 4, they were announcing everything that was going to be going on, and it was going to be the longest phase in history. Phase 4 is literally the longest phase in the multiverse saga right now. And one of these was one of their first animated series that would technically be in the MCU canon, but not really because it would be in the multiverse of the MCU, but still integral to the overall story, which is in fact Marvel Studios' What If, or just What If. I gotta stop saying Marvel Studios. It would basically be a series that would tell what if scenarios throughout the Marvel universe. Now, when I first heard about it, I didn't like the idea. I didn't feel like it felt like a good idea. I felt like they were wasting their potential with that type of animation, making this their first animated series. But then they announced it even further down the line, stating that this What If series was going to be telling us what if scenarios from Iron Man all the way up to Avengers Endgame, but excluding any Spider-Man movie they made. So Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home. This is mainly because of the fact that Sony owns the movie, even though these movies are to in fact take place in the MCU, but they still own Spider-Man, so you basically get the whole idea. So basically, we weren't going to get a What If episode on Homecoming or Far From Home. That's basically all you guys gotta know. And after hearing about this, I was excited. I saw the leak photos, I saw what the series was going for, I saw the animation, and I loved everything that I found out about the show. So I didn't want to wait each week for a new episode, so basically 9 weeks to watch all of season 1. So, just so that I didn't want to wait a whole week for a new episode. That's what I'm basically saying. So instead, I went ahead and just waited until all 9 episodes were released. There's also a fun fact about season 1 I'm going to tell you guys, but let's wait until we get there. So, now that that's all settled, let's finally review season 1 of What If. Now, I want to just go ahead and tell you guys that I kind of have to change the foundation of how I review this show, because I usually just talk about the story nonstop, but because the show has different episodes that has different settings, I kind of have to talk about each episode as if each episode is its own review. So, if you want to know why, that's the reason why. So, the first episode is called What If Captain Carter. Okay, that's not what it's called, but that's what I'm calling it. But I'm just gonna tell you what it's about instead of just saying the title. So in this episode, it is basically a what if scenario with Captain America: The First Avenger, where instead of Steve Rogers, Peggy Carter gets the super soldier serum and becomes Captain Carter. Now this episode is amazing. In one episode, they showed us that they could retell the story of the Marvel Universe in just 30 minutes with each movie, and the first episode makes it abundantly clear. Now, because Captain Carter becomes this super soldier, it reshapes the MCU, or more specifically, this universe in general, because Steve Rogers isn't Captain America anymore in this universe. And because of this, the events that happens in the movie happens a lot differently. Sure, to prove herself worthy as a soldier, she does go save the Howling Commandos, but the biggest difference here is that a woman is saving them, and Steve Rogers still plays a role in the overall story as being basically the first actual Iron Man in history by wearing the Hydra Stomper suit, which is kind of reminds me of Ironmonger mixed with Hulkbuster because of how it looks, and it actually does look good. Steve Rogers in the Hydra Stomper suit basically acts as Peggy Carter's sidekick, but their relationship is still relevant in this episode, which I really, really, really like. And overall, the episode is actually pretty good. But like I said, the events of the movies don't really happen exactly. For example, Bucky doesn't really die in this episode. Instead, it's believed that Steve actually died. And in the final moments of the episode, instead of Captain Carter, or just Peggy, we're just gonna call her Peggy, instead of Peggy going to the ice and being frozen for as much as long as Steve has. Instead, she goes through a portal and she's taken through time. She's not frozen in time. She's taken through time by the vortex from which Red Skull created. And he dies by being crushed by a Hydra. Now, this episode was actually really good. I did actually like how they had to change some things because of the central character. And overall, it got me hooked. So I went on to watch the next episode, which changes Black Panther and Guardians of the Galaxy, because instead of Yondu and the Ravagers going to Earth to abduct Peter Quill, they do go to Earth, but they don't abduct him. Instead, they abduct T'Challa, mistaking him for the same person as a child. Now, with this episode, T'Challa has always wanted to explore the world due to being sanctioned in Wakanda. And after exploring the outskirts of the kingdom, he encounters the Ravagers, and the Ravagers take him on an adventure of a lifetime. And then he grows into being his own version of Star-Lord, which is still Star-Lord T'Chaka. And he does a lot good with the name, more than Peter Quill, Star-Lord. And you can imagine how conflicted I was in this episode, because after the Infinity Saga concluded and the Multiverse Saga came in, my favorite character went from Iron Man, still Iron Man, but to Star-Lord. And when I found out that T'Challa did a better job as Star-Lord than Peter Quill, you can imagine how conflicted I was. I loved where they were going with this, but I also felt disrespected for the character that I liked. So you can imagine how conflicted I was. But in the end, I still liked this episode. I really loved how they took a different character. This is kind of like a what if scenario you should do more of. Because even though they did it with Captain Carter, she was still a Captain America adjacent character. And I felt like they should have did it with a different character. Like Howard Stark, for example. Howard Stark was in fact relevant in the overall story, but the point is he is still an Iron Man adjacent character. If they did something like this, that would have been an amazing what if scenario. But that doesn't mean I hated what the first episode did. So going back to episode 2, this episode is a full-on heist episode where the Ravagers, who are basically peacekeeping soldiers now, as it seems, seeing as to how they impacted a bunch of villains in the film, in the overall universe. One noticeably is Thanos. After being convinced by T'Challa to stop his little halfway genocide against every single planet, he discards his army and becomes a Ravager himself and becomes a good guy. And I actually like this little change here. This shows that if T'Challa really was taken from the Ravagers and became Star-Lord, in the mainline team MCU, he could have changed Thanos in his early days as a genocide warlord. That really makes you think, you know? And because of that, Nebula actually does keep most of her form. She is a bit of a cyborg on one part of her face, and I didn't really expect her to be a blonde. I was expecting more of a black, dark hair or something like that, but I guess blonde looks kind of good. She also seems to act as T'Challa's love interest, or maybe they're just that close as friends and work buddies. And Drax, actually, his family is still alive, so there's that. And the main villain of the of the episode is the Collector, and I gotta say, I do like where they were going with, but it didn't work with me the way it should have. The Black Order, it also works for the Collector, and they did kind of mute down or nerfed Thanos in this episode, which kind of maybe in my opinion, the reason why he is nerfed is because he was still early in his warlord days, so he wasn't that proficient as a fighter. That's my only explanation. Overall, this episode was really great. I did actually love the twist that T'Challa's family wasn't destroyed, because Yondu told him that Wakanda was deserted and destroyed, so there was no point in coming back to Earth. And he did actually come back to Earth, and I really liked it. The episode does end with Ego going to Earth and meeting Peter Quill, and I felt like that this was going to be one of those times where they were going to give us a sequel, but even though that's not what happened, we did technically see what happened in the end of the season. Although we don't see the whole thing, we do see it carry over overall. So, in my opinion, despite what we got from this episode, I still actually liked it. The next episode is What If We Lost Our Mightiest Avengers, and in this one, it's basically the overall storyline of all the movies within the MCU. So Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, Except not really, because the events really start with Iron Man 2, so Iron Man already happened, so basically the next four films that happen in the AMCU of Phase 1. So in this one, Iron Man dies after Black Widow gets injected, Black Widow injects him with some solution, and it's believed that she was the one who killed him. One thing led to another. Black Nick Fury's list of who could be their Avengers were dropping like flies, and he had to figure out who was being killed. The next one was Thor. The next one was Hulk, and then it was Hawkeye, and then it was Black Widow, and it was basically a what if, not a what if, a who done it kind of film. Episode. Oh my gosh, and I really like this one because no, I actually didn't. Okay, let me try to explain it a little more. So the who done it scenario in the MCU is a good idea. And it's a good twist when you're using characters that made up the very foundation of the MCU. But when you realize how important they are in the overall MCU, when you see them die so easy, you make it real. You make yourself. It makes you realize that it was easy to kill them from the very start. And I really didn't like that. I mean, I know what the episode was trying to convey. It's a turn your brain off type of episode and series, but I just didn't. I mean, it was nice to figure out who did it. I just feel like they didn't really need to make that episode, honestly. And they killed the Avengers in brutal ways. In my opinion, I feel like Iron Man died the least harmful, let alone painful. Like, he just got knocked out and died. But then we have Hulk, who literally popped like a balloon, and Thor, who was shot with an arrow, which I guess was also harmless too. But we don't know how Hawkeye exactly died. I'm sure it was some type of poison, and with Black Widow, we also don't know how she died, but she is dead. The only Avenger that was left that was saved because he was in ice was Captain America. In my opinion, I feel like we should have saw War Machine too, because technically he didn't become War Machine yet. So by that standard, he should have been what was left of the heroes too in Phase 1. And Captain Marvel, who was on her way to help with Loki, because of Thor's death, the Asgards came to Midgard, which is Earth, to wage war. But then they teamed up with Shield so they can bring the killer to justice. And the killer was actually Hank Pym, who loses his mind after losing his wife, no, his daughter, and who was Hope, and became the Yellow Jacket and killed everyone that Nick Fury was going to put on the Avengers. And then it's revealed that it was actually Loki, and after Yellow Jacket was taken into custody, well, Loki very much took over Earth. Overall, this was actually a really good episode, but it's hard to say that I love the episode and it's a bad episode. I can't say it's the worst episode in the whole season, let alone the whole series. It's just not an episode I say that I would watch over and over again unless I'm binging the series. Only if I'm binging the series. So now we go to the next episode, which is Strange Supreme. Now in this episode, this changes Doctor Strange's first film, where instead of losing his hands, he loses his lover, Christine. Well, I guess they weren't really lovers. I guess they were like in the middle, you know? Anyway, he does come to come pick her up on time, and then they go off. But then she dies in a crash, and the story basically goes the same. The only difference is that he loses the love of his life. And after becoming the Sorcerer Supreme, well, he realizes that he could change time. And he then realizes that he can't change his time because no matter where he goes, no matter how he slices it, no matter how he does it, Christine dies along the way. Rather they take a different route, rather they go somewhere else for their date, rather he doesn't pick her up at all, she dies. And it's because in this universe, Christine's death is an absolute point for Doctor Strange, a point in time that cannot be changed. So as a result, the timeline splits where Doctor Strange continues his efforts to bring her back, and one where he accepts it, and in doing so, in that timeline that we're following, he eats it's more like he absorbs the magic and power of every creature in the universe, and becomes Strange Supreme, and in doing so, crumbles the other timeline and universe. So as a result, a battle between the Doctor Strange that let go and the Doctor Strange that couldn't fights each other, and the Doctor Strange that let go loses. And he absorbs himself and uses his magic to bring him back, but in doing so, not only destroys his universe, but also Strange's alternate Strange Supreme's alternate universe as well. He brings her back, but due to his monstrous nature and the way he looks, the universe gets destroyed, leaving him in a bubble inside of a void. And that is a sad episode. I did like this episode. It was sad that this happened. It was sad that Doctor Strange couldn't change what was absolute. That just couldn't be changed. And you see the how hard it was for him to try to change that. But we all got to know that we can't change what already happened, what can't be changed. And even the Watcher told him that some things cannot be changed. And even though Doctor Strange learned it, he learned the lesson too late. And I think that's what's the most saddest part about this episode. Overall, it was still a good episode. So the next one is What If Zombies? So this one changes the storyline for Infinity War, where instead of Hulk coming back to warn everyone about Thanos, he comes back to an already dystopian world, where due to the events of Ant-Man and the Wasp, a zombie outbreak happens from the quantum realm, where Janet Van Dyne comes back with a quantum virus that turns both herself and Hank into zombies and attacks Scott Lang, and the virus would soon spread everywhere else. Even the Avengers weren't safe. Everyone, or a good quarter of the MCU of Earth, was turned into zombies. And what I loved about this is that Marvel took characters they knew would most likely survive and made them zombies, and took a small chunk of those who would survive and a huge chunk that wouldn't and made them the survivors. So we got Spider-Man, Winter Soldier, Happy Hogan, Sharon Carter, and a bunch of others to survive. And I really liked that surviving team. The biggest thing about this episode that I didn't like was that the characters started dropping like flies, because maybe there was a chance that there were more of them, but then over time they died, and the group that we went with is what's left of them. I mean, Wasp did reveal that that's all that was left of them. But the problem of it all is that they didn't have to kill them off so easily, because by the end of the episode, Spider-Man is the only original group of the survivors, whereas the new additions is the head of Scott Lang and what's left of Black Panther. And everyone else was killed along their journey to find a signal that keeps the enemies at bay, the zombies at bay, that could make a cure for them. And it's just weird that all these characters dropped like flies so quickly. I felt like we should have at least have gotten a good quarter of them dead, or at least half of them dead. But oh well. Also, Hulk isn't dead, so that's great. And Winter Soldier isn't dead either. It was already confirmed that he survived the fall. And looking at it now, it doesn't look like she threw him that far up, so he definitely survived. The only question is what he's been doing this whole time. That's the real question there. But I still liked the episode. It even had a tease that Thanos did come to Earth and became a zombie. The only question is, how did he get the rest of the stones? If I had to guess, obviously he got it. He got the Reality Stone from nowhere and the Soul Stone by killing Gamora, and I guess he did come to Earth after all and got the Time Stone and ended up in Wakanda, and that's how he got turned, because maybe he was bitten as soon as he got through the portal. Okay, that's my only headcanon. That's all I can do from there. Overall, although I didn't like that the surviving group died and all that was left was just 3 members, which was Spider-Man, Black Panther, and Ant-Man. It's just weird that it ended this way, but it was still a good episode, and we did get a spin-off series, which I am going to be seeing really soon. So the next episode is What If Killmonger Rescued Tony Stark? So this one changes the first movie in the MCU, which is Iron Man. And in this episode, it plays out as the same attack, but instead of a missile exploding and lodging a shrapnel in Tony Stark's chest, sparking his origin story as Iron Man, out of nowhere, Killmonger comes in and throws the missile and saves him. And that's the whole episode. So I just want to go ahead and say that this episode was actually really great. This episode wasn't just what if Killmonger saved Tony. This episode is what if Killmonger took a different route in taking over Wakanda and waging war across the world. Or I guess maybe his idea wasn't that if he committed it this early. I don't know. We don't really see how that universe unfolds in itself. So take what you will from there. Anyway, in this episode, yes, Killmonger saves Tony Stark from being captured by the Ten Rings or the terrorist group. call it whatever you will. And his first move was to reveal to Tony that Obadiah Stane was the one responsible for it, and as a result, he ended up working in Stark Industries with him, making robots that were modeled after Gundam from anime. And I gotta say, it was funny when he said he liked an anime. This was around the time that I started watching more and more anime. Around that time, like when I started watching more and more anime, it was like I still watched My Hero Academia, but I experimented with certain genres, and I kind of got that right there in my heart where he said he liked it anime. And this episode did a lot. First Killmonger kills Black Panther, and the next he kills James Rhodes, which I'm pretty sure was when Tony became more skeptical. A fight between them broke out, and once again, for the third time in the series, Tony Stark dies. So I just want to go ahead and say that I did say that Star-Lord is my favorite right now, but around the time that this episode came out, Iron Man was still my favorite. So you can imagine how ticked off I was when he died twice in season 1. I get it. Tony Stark isn't relevant to the MCU anymore. He's not important. He's not the hero anymore. You didn't have to kill him in one of your first animated series during your new saga in the MCU after Endgame and Spider-Man Far From Home. I get it, okay? Anyway, the episode does also have this big final fight where he ends up portraying everyone, and he goes back to Wakanda. Everyone welcomes him with open arms, and he basically plays both sides, but in the end of the day, he actually wins. He becomes king of Wakanda, and now Wakanda and the rest of the world are enemies with each other. But I do like when Shuri and Pepper does work together to actually put a stop to Killmonger as they see through his little game that he's playing. But I did actually like T'Challa's speech at the end of the episode. His crave for power will be his downfall. I know that's not what he actually says, but when you consider it, yeah, that is exactly what happened. So the next episode is what if Thor was the only child? So in this episode, Loki isn't adopted by Odin, and instead Thor stays an only child, and as a result he becomes basically a frat boy from Asgard, as he brings creatures from all over the realms to party in Midgard, which is Earth, and it actually basically does too much for Earth. So S.H.I.E.L.D. sends Captain Marvel, and there's been a debate of who's the strongest Avenger, and it was tied between Thor and Captain Marvel. Like around the time the movie came out, that was the debate. And this episode basically was giving us that answer. But in my opinion, I say it's a bit of a tie because they technically didn't win. I guess if we're putting it into rounds, then yeah, Thor won the first round. And overall, I really did love the reinvention of Thor and Jane, where they did still end up together. And we also have this one scene where Darcy and Howard actually gets together, Howard the Duck. But it was just a fling, I guess, or whatever. And I did actually liked all of these cameos. Like we see Mantis, we see Surtur, we see Drax at one point. I'm sure there was Star-Lord somewhere in the background, but just not a full-on appearance. But it was just amazing to see all these characters come together. It was also kind of funny when Nick Fury got knocked out. But in all honesty, this was actually a really funny episode. It wasn't too serious, it wasn't too dramatic, it wasn't too anything. It just felt like a good turn your brain off and laugh at the comedy kind of episode. And this was also around the time that Marvel started making Thor look like a dimwit, but still a good hero. Like, they changed his character after Thor Ragnarok, and since then he was still a valiant warrior and hero and member of the Avengers, but he still had that goofiness in him. Either way, it was still a really good episode. So the next episode is What If Ultron Won? So in this episode, we go to Age of Ultron, where Ultron successfully uploads his conscious into Vision, and apparently his plan after Ultron uploads into Vision, he basically nukes the whole world. And when Thanos comes in, he kills him and takes the Infinity Stone to become Infinity Ultron. And this is where episode 8 and 9 basically becomes one big story. So take what you will with what happens next. So he goes to every single planet in the universe and destroys everyone. The Nova Corps, Asgard, Sakaar, and it was just weird how Captain Marvel wasn't able to beat him. I mean, I thought she would be able to at least subdue him for a while until they figured out a new plan, but just wow, it's just amazing that this is how it happened. And then Ultron becomes aware that there is a multiverse, and we constantly switch between what Ultron is doing, what the Watcher is doing, and what's left of the Avengers, which is Hawkeye and Black Widow, as they're trying to save what's left of Earth by turning off Ultron. But due to being in alternate universes, because he's fighting with the Watcher, they can't turn him off. And all that work just for Hawkeye to die nearly for nothing. And after he loses, he is now destroying every single universe in the multiverse. And when he encounters Supreme Strange, he decides to make an Avengers team of his own known as the Guardians of the Multiverse. And basically everyone we're introduced to is on the team. Captain Carter, Star-Lord T'Challa, Strange Supreme, Killmonger, Party Thor, and Black Widow from that one universe. Kind of weird that we didn't see Spider-Man from the Zombies universe, and Captain America, or maybe Captain Marvel from that other universe as well, because they're also from those episodes. But it's just weird that this didn't happen. We should have gotten to see them in that episode, but overall it was just like an amazing episode. Like, what if this episode 9 was just an amazing episode? This was what if's Avengers. Like, at the end of every season we would get an Avengers movie in just 30 minutes, and I love the team up between them. It was just amazing seeing all these character interactions, all these team ups. I felt like we should have gotten an animated Avengers movie in theaters because of the animation that it looked and how the team ups looked. And although we are getting a lot of animated movies for the MCU, I think it's gonna happen in the reboot after Secret Wars. But all in all, this episode was amazing. We saw how all the characters were doing in their previous episodes, in their respective episodes. So we saw Ego in the middle of using Peter Quill as his battery. We saw Captain Marvel in her mission in her version of Winter Soldier, and we saw Thor fighting the Ultrons because they were from another multiverse, from another universe. We saw Killmonger falling as a king because everyone found out who he really is. All these plot lines were just amazing, and I did actually like how the episode ends. So they win by removing the stones and shutting down Ultron with Arnim Zola. But Killmonger gets the stones and becomes Infinity Killmonger, or whatever you want to call him, Infinity Eric, whatever you guys want to call him. And Doctor Strange, or Strange Supreme, puts them both in a somewhat of a time bubble loop where they're constantly trying to steal the Infinity Stones. And, well, and everyone goes back to the way they are. There is a post-credit scene that teases season 2 and where Captain Carter is going to be going, but as far as things go, that was an amazing season. Every single episode explored outcomes and scenarios that I really loved, and I just love it. It was weird how I hated the idea at first, but then I knew more about the series overall by information after information. And I remember in my old channel that I always talked about what these shows would look like, what is going on, what's happening, what are we seeing here. And it's amazing. I just really loved it. So you can imagine how excited I was when season 2 was announced. Speaking of season 2, there was an extra episode, but they couldn't finish it in time, and it told the story of what would happen if Iron Man didn't go through the portal in time to go back to Earth and ended up in Sakaar. And that episode ended up being an episode for season 2. And we'll get there when we get there, but for right now, this is season 1. Here's my rating. I'm going to give the story for all 9 of the episodes a 7 out of 10. I did enjoy season 1 as a whole. I think that it's the best season in the whole series, but episode 3 is just my least favorite in the whole season, and it's hard to give it a higher rating other than just a 7 out of 10. I'm going to give the whole show right now, well, Okay, I guess I can't really do that because it's the whole show. So I guess the whole show for this part, an 8 out of 10.